going to look at stitching our exterior together. So we need our two panels, so that's the back panel and the front panel, with or without. When I say front panel, this could be the back panel. It's really very much up to you whether you want your zipper pocket on the back or the front, or if you don't want it at all. But the two panels, the two exterior panels, we're going to lay them right sides together, matching up all of the edges, and we are going to use some clips because that's the right thing to do. I don't always use clips, you know, I don't always use clips. I'm not a person that tends to spend a lot of time clipping things if I don't need to, but it does make a difference to the finished article if you clip things together. So well worth doing. So we're matching up all of these sides. Now, a lot of bags with darted bottoms will have you sew the darts first. In this instance, we don't sew the darts first, and I'm going to show you why. Matching darts once you've sewn them is actually really difficult. So what we do is we'll sew the darts once we've sewn the bag. So I'll show you as we go along. So don't feel tempted to sew up those darts, because that's what most bags will tell you to do. Most patterns will tell you to do. I just find it's easier to do them retrospectively, and then you end up with perfectly matched darts on your finished bag. And if you've got a fussy fabric, that's not quite so important, but if you've got a plainer fabric, it shows. And I really don't like that look when it's looking sort of not well matched. There we go. So I'm just putting a few clips down the sides and some along the bottom, and we are just going to sew the sides, one side, second side, bottom, not necessarily in that order. We're stitching in a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, so that's 10 millimeters. Stitch length just below 3 for me, because that's what my preferred construction length is. Back stitching at the top to secure my threads. And you should not be stitching over your fusible fleece. Your fusible fleece should be within your seam allowance. Sorry, outside of your seam allowance, my apologies. So we get down to the bottom there, and I just do a few back stitches just to secure my threads. And then I go along onto the bottom. And I'm really sorry you can't actually see what I'm doing. And then the last side. And there we are, they're all stitched together. So what we're going to do now is, along these edges, because they are slightly curved, I'm just going to do a few snips. Now I'm not making the triangles, I'm just cutting snips, and they're approximately an inch apart. And this will help. We're going to press our seam allowances open in a minute, and this will just help us do that, because trying to do that around a curve doesn't really work terribly easy, but it's not terribly well, but it's not a really big curve, so I don't need to take my pinking shears and everything to it. So I'm going to pop I have a tailor's ham. I'm going to use my tailor's ham. If you don't have a tailor's ham, roll up a tea towel and pop it inside. And just open up your seam allowances, and there should be no fusible fleece within that seam allowance. If you've used a foam, then you're obviously going to have to trim out the foam from the seam allowance, so removing your basting stitches and trimming away your foam. And I would suggest you would still need to open your seams up, because it will look smarter if you do. So just pushing my tailor's ham just that little bit further in, and again just using the point of my iron to open up those. And my fusible fleece has come away. This is what happens when you start manipulating, but never mind. I can press it in a minute and it will go back on. Clearly I hadn't pressed that as well as I thought I had. So we're going to do that on both sides. And on the bottom of the bag. It just, those little snips just help it to easily go around this curve. And it isn't a big curve, so we don't need the triangles that we might do on a tighter curve. This just allows us to get this fabric open. I feel really cack-handed because I don't usually do it here on the table. So I think I'm doing it at an angle that I'm not particularly comfortable with, so that you can see what I'm doing. Mind your fingers. Got a bit of history of burning my fingers lately. I had somebody comment that when I turn away from the camera to get my iron, they can't hear me. So I tried to grapple for my iron without turning, and then ended up putting my hand on the hot iron plate, which ended up with me having to lose the video because I swore quite loudly. So now I'm trying to be a bit more careful, but not to turn my head away just in case anybody can't hear. Now along this bottom, I don't find I need to do those snips, but if you feel that you do, please do. And I'm going to give that another press because that back piece I obviously haven't pressed as well as I should do, and the fusible fleece is coming away. So I'll just give it a press from the outside once I've done. These seams are open. I think I didn't leave it long enough. Perhaps wasn't as cool as it should have been. There we go. Take the tailor's ham out of there. I'm just going to turn this the right side out so that I can give that a press to refix this bottom bit here. It's just come away in the corner, so just going to give that a... You can always go back. You can always go back. It's not the end of the world if something like that happens. Just... So it's on the back bottom corner, so I'm just going to give that a bit of a press to refix it. As long as the main bulk of it's fixed, it's not actually going to make a vast amount of difference because it's going to stay where it is anyway. But it's nice just to try and fix it. And be careful if you're needing to refix your fusible fleece on the front, because if you are, then you don't want to get your iron anywhere near that piece of faux leather that you've got for your overlay. Now, I'd normally say that leave that to cool so that it sets, but I am going to turn it the wrong way out so that I can actually show you the next stage, because I don't want to have to wait half an hour to do that. Actually, that looks like it's fitted. It's set quite nicely. Okay, so I'm going to pop my hand inside, and you can see, actually you can't because it's not sitting. Pop my hand inside of the bag and you can see where that opening is, those two little triangles. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold those triangles, those 2 points together. So what I want to do is match up the side seam here with the bottom seam here. And I'm just going to pop a clip on. Now this isn't going to be, it's not perfectly straight. It's slightly at almost a slight curve. That's fine. Don't worry, that's how it should be. So I'm just going to pop a clip in there and pop a clip in there. And you can see there, I think you probably can see, it's just ever so slightly curved. And I'm going to stitch along that curve using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to bring this over. And what we're going to try and do is keep our seam allowance open as we come across. And ideally we need to try and keep those two seams, the side seam and the base seam, together. Now if you're worried that you can't, you don't feel that you can confidently stitch that, you can always mark a line and stitch on the line. Now from this side you can see it easier. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim the excess seam allowance from the ends, not from the middle, just from the ends. And then I'm going to do a second line of stitching just outside of that first line of stitching, just to give it a little bit more security. And it's literally probably less than 1/8 of an inch. It's not mandatory, and actually it's not written in the pattern, but it's something that I've taken to doing with nearly all corners, whether they be boxed corners or darted. So that's the one, that's the first one. We're going to do exactly the same with the second one. So popping my fingers inside the bag, and you can see my fingers sticking out, splaying my fingers so that that opens up the bottom of the cutouts at the bottom of the bag, those triangle cutouts. I'm making sure that my side seam and my base seam are perfectly matched, and clipping, and just one at each end. And again, stitching using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Don't worry about pushing the bag about. Once you've turned this the right way out, you're going to give it a jolly good press anyway. So although it looks a bit wrinkled and squashed and beaten up at the moment, it will look absolutely perfect once it's all pressed and sorted. So again, we're sewing in a slight curve. Trimming off just the very ends of those darts, being careful not to cut through your stitching, and then adding that second line of stitching just outside of the first for security. Then we can turn our bag. side out and give those lovely bottom darts a bit of a press. And what you really want is for the side seam and the bottom seam, and I'm literally pressing all the way up the seams, my hand is inside, that side seam and the bottom seam to match up perfectly. Do be careful not to touch your overlay, because that will make you swear. And there we have the outside of our bag completed. Wasn't too bad, was it? I think it looks pretty cool. Now you can see she's a fairly good size bag because she's got quite a wide base on her because of those darted corners. That's not a box corner, it's a darted corner. It gives a slightly softer look to it, and it's not quite as angular as the box corners can be. It allows you to keep the curves. It does take a bit of pressing though. You can use a tailor's ham or tea towel rolled up. Actually, once it's all put together, I'm okay with my hand inside. I've got asbestos hands like a lot of women do. If you're a person who likes to cook, I don't tend to pick up oven gloves very often. So there we are. We have the first part of our bag all completed. How cool does that look? So we're going to move on to making the strap, and I'm probably going to show you the pattern has a very simple strap with no hardware, but I may well show you a second option as well. So we will see. I'm really pleased with that.